This is Robert M. Price, and I'm glad you're joining us on Apostasy Now.
Because I'm very much a skeptic. I'm more of a skeptic than I am an atheist. I mean, atheist is a conclusion based on my skepticism.
You'll have to come like a little child to the foot of the cross.
That attitude is what is responsible for the rise of atheism.
That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith? With the death penalty. Thank you.
This is Apostasy Now.
For people to get the information correct before they start yapping.
Get ready to root for the bad guys.
Begins with E, evidence. All the evidence.
Apostasy Now. This episode, I was blown away by the generosity of Dr. Robert M. Price, who agreed to be on the show. You're going to be impressed, to say the least, by his level of knowledge of the Bible and his passion for evidence-based history. He's going to challenge a lot of your preconceived notions, and I hope this will be a first step towards a lot of the concepts he tries to put forward, and an introduction, if you don't already know him, or a better knowledge of this man and the work that he is continuing to do. I see him as a valuable resource, and I hope more people are going to take advantage of what he has to offer, which is to expand your knowledge in areas that constantly come into contact with other people's beliefs and disbeliefs. In addition to that, Smashlock is back this week. I always enjoy having him riding shotgun. He's got some interesting questions as well. And coming up next, I couldn't help but make a small little homage to this man's legacy, which by the way I talk, I'm sure you can tell I'm a fan. So if you don't like it, skip ahead 6 minutes, but otherwise, enjoy the tune.
Dr. Price is a pretty unique guy with some unique arguments. I got about 60 pages of notes.
I had actually printed out a bio of his, but he'd written so many books, it was like 10 pages long.
I told my guys at the Institute that I shouldn't be debating you. I should be teaching a course on you.
Robert M. Price. 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 Robert M. Price.
I told my guys at the Institute that I shouldn't be debating you. I should be teaching a course on you.
Robert M. Price. Dr. Craig often appeals to the consensus of New Testament scholars on behalf of conservative views. By contrast, I am glad to confess that the opinion of the majority of scholars makes no difference whatever to me. In fact, in the Gospels, after all, it's a consensus of scholars in the Sanhedrin that condemns Jesus to death. As Francis Schaeffer used to say, you can't settle the question of truth by a majority vote. I think Martin Luther and Galileo and others knew that too. If I am interested in a question, I must examine the issues for myself. I reject, for example, Velikovsky's astronomy, not because the Academy sneers at it, which I guess they do, but because his methodology seems flawed to me as I understand it. And forgive me, but so does Dr. Craig's. First, let me call attention to two fundamental axioms of Dr. Craig's work. The first is what strikes me as a kind of double truth model. The second is the old red herring attempt to evade the principle of historical analogy by means of the claim that critics reject miracle stories only because they espouse philosophical naturalism. The second follows from the first, and both commit the fallacy of ad hominem argumentation even while projecting it onto the opponent. Nor is naturalism the issue when the historian employs the principle of analogy. As F.H. Bradley showed in the presuppositions of critical history, no historical inference is possible unless the historian is do not grant this, nothing will seem amiss in believing stories that A turned into a werewolf or B changed lead into gold. Hey, just because we don't see it happening today doesn't prove it never did. One could just as easily accept the historicity of Jack and the Beanstalk on the same basis as long as one's sole criterion for historical plausibility is anything goes. If there are ancient parallel legends about other saviors and sages rising from death or ascending into heaven, but there is no present-day instance, is the historian to be maligned as a narrow dogmatist or a moral coward refusing to repent? He judges the story of Jesus' resurrection as probably a legend too. The historical axiom of analogy does not dogmatize. Critical historians are not engaging in metaphysics and epistemology as if they could hop into a time machine and pontificate, A didn't happen, B did. Again, Dr. Craig and his brethren are just projecting. It is they and not critical historians who want to be able to point to sure results. Imagine a creed. If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thy heart that God has probably raised him from the dead, thou shalt most likely be saved. Now, who's the joke on there? Historians don't have creeds. They frame hypotheses. Sure, you can find some hidebound prop, some small-minded, insecure windbag who will not budge from a pet theory because he has too much personally invested in it. But you have no trouble recognizing such a person as a hack, a fake, a bad historian who want to know better, Holocaust deniers, for example. The last thing you do is to emulate such behavior and make it into an operating principle. But apologists do. Again, it's projection.
A soft answer turneth away wrath. That is a maxim I live by. I don't want any trouble. If I have to pipe up and dispute about something or protest about something, well, it will mean all the more if I usually don't get upset. When I do, you'll know it means something. I've learned over the decades to have a sensitivity. It's like another great Bible passage, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I don't want to make people feel bad or angry or condemned, so I try to speak positively and to be charitable in speech. And to me, that is very important as a guide for life.
I told my guys at the Institute that I shouldn't be debating you. I should be teaching a course on you.
It's great to talk to you.
Oh, you too.
How have you been? How have your holidays been?
Oh, loads of fun. Busy with reading and writing, but also rapping. Loads of presents. It's going to be fun. I hope yours are merry and delightful.
Overall, they've been good. We had a death in the family, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he was my uncle, and I was just kind of getting to know him, but, at least at the end, he knew he was loved and things like that, so that's powerful.
That's great. Wow. Jeez, what did he die of?
He died of a heart attack. I guess it was so sudden, the doctor thinks he didn't even know what had happened.
Wow.
Well, he had smoked his whole life, and he had been a heavy drinker for most of his life. And, but, he was in at the doctor's the day before, and the doctor told him that he didn't think anything was wrong.
Whoo, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Pleasure to meet you, by the way, sir. My name is Chris, but I go by Smashlock. I'm Mr. Dragon's beard partner in crime.
Ha-ha. Well, good to meet you.
You too.
So, I've been following you for some time. You have your regular show, The Bible Geek. And it's, I first really started following you with the Human Bible. It was a little bit more, I think, geared towards new listeners.
That's right.
Yeah, and the Human Bible was my way of getting used to your sense of humor. Yeah, but I listened to the other show regularly. I was sorry to hear the Human Bible was having some kind of trouble.
Yeah, there was I think, a decline in giving to the parent group, the Center for Inquiry, after some kind of disastrous blow up in a conference they had about the role of women in free thought. Somebody, I mean, it's easy not to be orthodox enough of a feminist for some people to start screaming, and somebody made some remark that caused a huge furor. Luckily, I had nothing to do with it, and still don't really know what happened and don't want to. But their support shrank, and so they decided they couldn't keep the thing going. But since I was really handling most of the thing with, and I figured I could easily just switch it over to the geniuses that put out the Bible Geek, I could just keep doing that too. And so I did a bunch of them, and that they're finally, I think, airing. And as soon as they're done, I'm going to start up with more new ones of the Human Bible as well.
Oh, awesome. I guess, the thing that really drew me to listening to you is not just, you have an incredible wealth of knowledge on the topic, like in the entire field. Listening to answer questions, like off the cuff, that's impressive. I think most people only get to hear that if they go to like a university and they really get to know a professor. That's quite a service you're providing to people.
I'm thrilled whenever I hear somebody is actually getting something out of it. It's enormous fun for me to do.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, on behalf of myself and many others, thank you. That's, like I say, that's not something you get online it's not an everyday thing. I'm kind of forming, as I listen to you, I'll not always understand what you're talking about at the time. Some things are pretty specific, but I'll get like a general sense. And then when I come back around and the topic is discussed in another light, then it slowly starts to add up to a more concrete understanding as they accumulate.
Well, that's always been my experience reading different scholars, that some of them will take certain axioms in the field and certain research results for granted, and I don't really feel at ease until I hear something else, a comment on their work or some other elucidation, like you say, and I feel like I have to really go back and reconstruct it so I know what they think and why and what led them to it, or I don't have any right to an opinion. So that is I think to even recognize that, you're really right on the right track, and I commend you for it.
There's a couple of things that I think that it would benefit a lot of people to understand a little better that I think that you're very good at clearing up. And one of them is the skeptical approach, probably not just to biblical history and biblical text, but that's your specific field that you talk to people about. So I was wondering, before we get to that though, maybe you could tell us just a general idea of along the process of how you got there, where you started with your interest in the Bible and its history, and how it kind of slowly morphed into where it is now.
Well, it's a pretty simple process biographically and logically. I got converted to fundamentalism, born-again Christianity, when I was about 10, started going to a conservative Baptist Association church in New Jersey, and that really took root, and I began reading the Bible devotionally. I could make something out of some of it, but I was eager to understand it better and better. And it wasn't long before I learned about apologetics, how I saw some kind of brief film in a youth group, I think, about someone showing the dates of the Gospels and how close they were to the events, and so it all had to be true. And I thought, wow, I mean, I never really even thought of that. I just figured, yeah, that's what they say in church and it must be true. But to think that there was some objective evidence and you could demonstrate it, wow. And so I began to read books about that and to shore up my faith. But a very few years later, I began to see big holes in the reasoning and in the evidential basis for it, and wound up much more skeptical. And I guess I was, I kind of got to the viewpoint that Bart Ehrman, for instance, would occupy now, not believing in the perfection, the inerrancy, the accuracy of the Bible, understanding that belief in God was a whole different matter, more of a philosophical question that didn't really depend on the Bible, and vice versa. And being an agnostic as to whether there was any supernatural or not, but I was sympathetic toward religion and theology, more and more liberal theology. I found that the grasp I thought I had of that was the product of one-sided presentation by evangelicals. And once I read these people for myself, I realized there was a lot more to them. Well, as the years went by and I got degrees in theology and New Testament and so on, I realized there's just such an embarrassment of riches, so many interesting possibilities, but no way to prove any of them, that I guess, and then I began to look into deconstructive philosophy and things, and I just thought it's no longer really even a question of being able to believe in these unseen things. I'm not even sure if that's meaningful anymore, but I'm already getting lost in the weeds here. But the main thing was that fundamentalism instilled in me an insatiable curiosity to understand the Bible better, and eventually I understood it well enough not to believe in it anymore, but to continue my interest in it in the same way a classicist is interested in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It doesn't occur to him he ought to believe in Zeus or Achilles, but it's endlessly fascinating.
My origins are evangelical as well. It's evangelical Mennonite, but modern Mennonite. And I had somewhat of the same approach of how my evolution went. It went from wanting to know more because I was devout, and then you start learning some things that make you uncomfortable. You know, you have to make that choice. Am I going to be true to what I'm learning and keep carrying on in an honest way, or am I going to, listen to the excuses, I guess, that are more convenient or more soothing?
And it's hard to persuade yourself you ought to do that, because all of the stuff we learn about the Reformation and the theological debates, and that you've got to give Scripture primacy and not fudge it. Well, when Christianity itself is at stake in the same court, it's hard to suddenly shift gears and say, well, I don't really care that much what the evidence says. I want to stick with the party line. I mean, that's the very thing you learn that Christianity and biblical studies progressed by not doing. And so it's tough to suddenly just suppress your questions.
I think there's also, for me anyways, there was also this sense of internal loyalty. And it's actually been very illuminating for allowing me to understand a lot of things you're saying about how little we can tell about texts that we don't have, and people assume that those texts must have been such and such or at such and such a time, because they give kind of a special honesty and devotion to people at an earlier time within the faith than we would have now. Like if you would say that about someone, say, who's running a newspaper, a lot of people would doubt you. Oh, well, what's the evidence? How do we know this newspaper knows what? And you're like, well, how about the Bible? We didn't know for 100 years what was going on with these people here, and we're kind of assuming based on this. But what external evidence supports any of that? So there's always an interesting kind of stirring the stew type of situation, what we know, what we don't know.
Yeah, that separates the dogmatist from the historian. The historian, at least ideally, does not have a vested interest in believing a certain version of events. You're always hoping more evidence will turn up archaeologically or new documents or whatever, and if they do, you're going to be happy to go wherever they lead. You're not in terror that they're going to debunk your favorite theory about why we won World War II or something. You want to know what happened, not that something in particular did. But the dogmatist doesn't have that luxury. He's tied to a view that must be true, and if new evidence indicates otherwise, well, to hell with the evidence.
Now, I've heard you talk briefly about it before. There are believers, so like you say, people who are into the dogma, but then there are people who just seem extremely traditional or traditionalists. What do you find is the key difference that takes someone who says they don't believe in the faith, but they still seem to hold on to almost essentially the same types of beliefs when it comes to the text or the history of it?
I tend to think that is biographical inertia, if I can use, I hate to do this for fear I will sound like I'm attacking him, but somebody like Bart Ehrman, for instance, is not a believer anymore. He's an agnostic and practically an atheist. What led him to that? Well, it wasn't New Testament criticism. It wasn't the issue of how historical are the Gospels and so on. It was the philosophical issue of theodicy. He just didn't find it was plausible to believe in a providential, loving, righteous God given the way the world is, and I agree with him. But because of that, I wonder if he just decided to rest where he was in a kind of moderately critical approach to biblical criticism. I mean, I can't read the guy's mind, and of course his opinions are valid or invalid independent of how he may have arrived at them. But when you don't quite understand why someone takes the opinion they do based on the strengths of the theory or of their reasoning, you do begin to wonder if it's something like just biographical inertia thing, that what they're used to believing, or one other thing like Peter Berger describes, plausibility structures. I know from his writings, Bart Ehrman, it's very important for him to be within the mainstream consensus of scholarship, as if that is a guarantee that certain opinions are correct, whereas it's very clear to me that just doesn't matter. That's the whole history of science is a matter of consensuses being overturned. But in the meantime, it's hard to, as I say, think out of the box.
But that means that everything attributed to Jesus must have served the purposes of somebody in the early church, and therefore it all goes by the boards. None of it jumps the hurdle of dissimilarity, because it's Christians saying it. George Eldon Ladd used to say, now Jesus must have called himself the Son of Man because nobody calls him that in the epistles. Why not, if it was a Christian thing? Hey, George, who do you think wrote the Gospels? Oh, boy. So he's right. This is designed to clear the deck to see what's left. It's like Cartesian doubt. Let's get rid of all the insecure assertions and propositions so we can start over from a firm foundation. Same thing here, only for reasons that Bart and most scholars never happen to notice, nothing jumps the hurdles. Nothing passes the test. I don't know why that's so tough to understand, but he's just embarrassing himself here, I think.
So I think that's one thing that's going on. Now, obviously, Ehrman, just as an example, and he's very brilliant. Or another one, Maurice Casey, who's, I think, about to crucify me and Earl Doherty and others in a book on the Christ myth theory he's putting out. This guy is incredibly brilliant. I love his work on many aspects of the New Testament, but I just think he's kind of stuck in a traditional paradigm. I wouldn't say that if I didn't feel that his criticisms are let's see, I'm losing track of this. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't offer that theory about it if I saw the cogency of his criticisms, but I don't. And so then I have to say, why is such a brilliant scholar taking this approach? And I'm kind of assuming it's just tradition, but who knows? Ultimately, it doesn't matter. You just need to evaluate anybody's work on its own merits.
Doesn't it come back to, I was talking about skepticism at the beginning, doesn't it come back to each of us has a bias, and we need to take that into account and try to basically bring it under control? And whenever we approach a topic, try to take steps to remove our bias from our final conclusion, our considerations.
That's right, and it's right whether you're on the conservative or the liberal, the believing or the skeptical side. Though there is a built-in danger for faith dogmatists, apologists, because they have begun to use probabilistic reasoning to try to show that their beliefs are reasonable, and that can be fatal because once it becomes theoretically doubtful, it's hard to just shut that off when you go back to church and just believe it by faith. You've kind of given that up, and so there's a sort of a Trojan horse thing going on there. But yeah, I'm the first to ask skeptics and unbelievers, why and how did you come to your conclusion? Were you just sick of being confined by this religion, or did you really decide you think it's not true? Because it's important to have a clean conscience on this.
Yeah. As opposed to, you know, like some people, it's also just about aggression. They hear some of, it's like giving them ammo when you're being critical and you present to them the doubts, the reasonable doubts and the holes in the evidence. They'll just take it as evidence or as ammunition. That's, I think, probably more so in the atheist community. I've heard people being like that than specifically the skeptics community. But I want to give you credit as well for always, you know, I think you put up also a good example for how to treat your opponents as opposed to enemies. I've heard people with different opinions from people, and they're not always like you just. The way you treated Bart Ehrman. You gave him credit for being brilliant, and you specified it was a disagreement with his conclusions. A lot of people don't bother to do that. Ad hominem attacks, or like you say, they'll point to anything they can about their academic standing or anything like that rather than the argument at hand.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, that still amazes me. Isn't it obvious that mudslinging just is irrelevant? I don't see how it, like Earl Doherty. Oh, he's not a professionally trained scholar. Who cares? He published his own book. Yeah, so did David Hume. It just doesn't, I mean, your credentials or the cogency of what you say, and I'm sure all these guys know that. If you ask them, isn't that true? They'd say, well, yes, it is, but it doesn't seem to stop them from maligning them the next time. That is inexplicable to me.
Yeah, it's really strange. But I guess that's what we get back with. They have that's the human bias. It's human nature. You want to have, you know, like maybe a narrative. There are good guys and bad guys, or this is the cause we're championing. So anyone that gets in the way needs to be crushed.
It's like a duality with anything. You know, there's duality between a lot of things that humans deal with on a day-to-day basis. Men and women, conflict versus resolution. I mean, we always try and put things into one of two camps, is my opinion anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at the political mudslinging that's going on. They often point out how back in the 80s you had a real collegial spirit between Reagan and Tip O'Neill, for example, diametrically opposed on many issues, but they could leave it at the office and go out and have a drink together afterward. Whereas now it's just like the Hatfields and the McCoys, or on Facebook when somebody weighs in on some political issue and you disagree, you're just evil. And it's so depressing. I just can't stand that.
It's with us or against us type of thing.
Yeah.
Intolerance. Yeah, that's another thing too. You, on your show, you intentionally try not to get sidetracked too much into politics and whatnot. But I have noticed that some of your political views would not be it's not part of the reigning agenda in the atheist community.
Oh, you ain't kidding there. Yeah.
I think that's healthy. I think that's good for. I feel more comfortable that we have different points of view rather than everyone basically nodding their head to supposedly some kind of, I don't know, hegemony in the
is it
social
awkward
view.
that I'm nodding my head right now?
Yeah, He's nodding his head to a lot of this.
Yeah, that is really true. And again, it's like a plausibility structure thing where we're the in group and you're the out group. And how do I know we're right? Well, because I'm in the in group. You're wrong because you're not in it. Like in the Gospel of John, the reason you don't hear my voice is you're not part of my flock. And that's I just think that there's certain habits of mind that that might incline one to liberalism intellectually and politically, but to me it seems more consistent to apply the same skepticism of dogma to political dogma, because it seems very clear to me that, like, when you hear spin doctors on different pundit talk shows, I recognize immediately the voice of apologists. That they're using talking points just like apologists for the resurrection or whatever. Generation after generation use the same tired, bogus arguments. The arguments have become as much a cherished creed as the creed they're trying to defend with them. And it seems I think I can smell it by now, this kind of spin and on behalf of dogma. And I don't, to me, I mean, personally, from my worm's eye view, I see more of that going on with liberal progressives. I mean, I may not be seeing the thing right. I don't know. But it's my skepticism that leads to both my views vis-a-vis religion and politics.
Yeah, well, I went from being conservative in my younger days to being liberal in my university days. And now I take it, I think what you're getting at, I take it a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
That's how I'm going to take each situation. And you're right. I think maybe what makes it seem worse for the left rather than the right, so to speak, is the left really believes that they are overcoming the ignorance of the right. Right? The right thinks they're on a moral crusade in a sense of, the Bible or traditional values. But I don't think the left has really become aware of the fact that they're on a moral crusade as well.
Oh, yeah. Like this tiring Duck Dynasty thing, or as I like to call it, the Hick Dynasty debate. It's obvious that this guy, what's his name, Robertson or Robinson or something, looks like he's from ZZ Top, all of them do. It's obvious he is I mean, I don't agree with what he said, if I even understand it right, but it's the reaction to this guy is that he is a heretic who must be silenced. And you only think that way if you have an authoritarian approach that says, oh, no, look, to hell with pluralism and tolerance. We don't have time for that. We've got to smash dissent down with the iron fist of orthodoxy. And that's always been the case on the left as well as the right. I mean, after all, the fascists and the Nazis were leftists. They were all socialists of one kind or another. We tend to think of them as the ultimate rightists, but they weren't. But I mean, that doesn't describe a lot of the great liberals in American history. But you can have either side go bad once they embrace an authoritarian, we're right and you're going to hell attitude.
Yep.
I just had a question on that, actually, since you brought it up. See, I've been having a fairly lengthy discussion on Facebook message board about this whole Robertson discussion. And it's my take that a lot of people who are feeling bad for him say that his freedom of speech has been infringed against. And my personal opinion was that he had every right to say what he did. Nobody told him he couldn't say it. Nobody stopped him from saying it. But freedom of speech is distinct and different from freedom from consequences.
Yeah, that's true. Plus, it's just a policy decision from the network. I don't see what the big deal is there. I guess the only thing that rubs me the wrong way is the attitude of those who are condemning the guy. It sounds to me as if he's a heretic who must be silenced somehow. I would rather see a debate over the issues such as you just framed them. But it's this intolerant, jackbooted, politically correct thing that I can't stomach.
Yeah.
I don't care what the guy thinks. I mean, who really cares? I mean, you've got the modern equivalent of hee-haw on that show. Do you really think anyone should take seriously the opinions of Junior Samples or Jed Clampett? I mean, the whole thing's a freak show anyway. That's the whole point.
Well, yeah. Plus, I think that GQ kind of set him up for that knockdown, right? Because they sell more magazines if controversy is stirred up over an issue that they printed with something he said that's controversial.
Yeah.
I just tossed up on Facebook that day, well, maybe it was a couple days after, people were going on about it. My comment was, are you really surprised? Really? I was like, no, you're not surprised. Not really.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. They're just hoping somebody like him would say something like this. And of course, they know that that's their opinion. What's the big deal? I think, therefore, it's an opportunity to bash fundamentalists and traditional views. I hold many traditional values, though opposition to homosexuality is not one of them. I'm pro-gay, like you said, issue by issue.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find disturbing is that this is the #1 cable show. That amazes me.
Oh. Sorry, like I've had similar critiques of other networks. I don't know if it's the same down in the States, but up here in Canada, there's the History Network, and they play this show called Ancient Aliens on the History Network, and that's a hard pill for me to swallow. Like, I don't know, people like ridiculous sideshows, and that's what this is. And to get back to the point about what he said, my particular personal view is that no speech should be infringed against. I think everyone should be able to say anything they want, no matter how asinine it is, because if you drive that underground, if you make it illegal or wrong to say to the point that nobody's saying anything, then no debate, no discourse happens.
That's right, and that's what, though legally that's not... free speech is not being suppressed. There is this general honor shame thing where you're made to feel you dare not say certain things, to the point where it's really bizarre. Like when Katy Perry had a Japanese kimono on in some performance, there were people screaming that she was some kind of racist or I guess colonial exploiter. Are you insane? I mean, it's getting to the point where you're not even going to be able to say Japanese or African or Canadian or anything else because only the people that live there can speak it. Yeah. They like the N-word, right? They can say it, but you can't. And so they have a copyright on the mere mention of their ethnicity. And if you allow that there is such a thing as ethnicity, you're in the Ku Klux Klan. It's insane.
Well, I figure it'll get a little worse before it gets better, but pretty soon I'm thinking that you won't be able to refer to any ethnicity that ends in IAN.
Yeah.
But only those. The rest is free.
The rest of you are fine.
Yeah, I've heard things where people are starting to try to crack down on humor. Humor in particular, I think, is an important area that we try not to become. We should not try to legally legislate humor too much.
Yeah.
Within reason, but like only the most extreme cases really should set off the red alert. Humor has never really fit into the PC camp. It's not the way it works.
You can always tell something significant about someone who has no sense of humor, especially poking fun at themselves. This is why I always am tickled to see, well, in the old days, I wouldn't watch Saturday Night Live today if you paid me, but in the old days, whenever you would see people I can't stand otherwise, like Al Gore or Al Sharpton on the show poking fun at themselves, I don't care what else they think. That's a good guy. I feel like that humanizes them and shows that they're not villains, no matter how stupid what else they may have to say is.
Yeah. It's almost like an acknowledgement of their imperfections, their limitations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do have a question for you. I'm just curious about your sense in this, because you've been talking about dogmatism. And my question to you is, amongst the atheist community, do you think that part of the problem why some of the atheist community hold so strongly to views that should be in any rational discussion open to that discussion, do you think that it's just human nature that we seek consensus with large groups?
Oh, yeah, we feel secure that way. The old plausibility structure thing again. We feel more at ease with either the majority or at least a good group of people that we can subsume ourselves under, as Eric Hoffer says in The True Believer. And that makes it very easy to just feel with certainty that you're right, whether you're a Baptist fundamentalist or an atheist. And I don't mean to say that anyone is actually letting that substitute for argument, but because, often these people do have good, intricate, compelling arguments, I think, especially on the atheist side. But you do have to wonder about the militancy. That disturbs me a bit, because I feel like, get a life. What is the I don't understand the crusading evangelistic approach of some of the new atheists, in that I just can't accept what Sam Harris says about if you allow middle-of-the-road religiosity as harmless, you're really aiding and comforting the Taliban. I know way too many harmless religious people to think that makes any sense at all. Though I do agree with Sam Harris that so many people's beliefs are utterly without foundation that you got to respect them, but there's no need to respect what they think.
Yeah.
But why go try to convert them all? I don't see how that's anybody's business.
Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over. From this time forward, you will service us.
Yeah, I think that when I first really acknowledged that I was an atheist, and I started really getting involved, reading up on it, kind of sharpening my intellect on these issues that I had kind of shied away from, there was a period when I was pretty aggressive.
Inevitably, yeah.
Yeah, but eventually the way that I put it for myself is I say there's a time and a place. Right?
Yeah.
So the example I always use that everyone understands, at least everyone I've met so far, is that a bad place or an unacceptable place to start telling people that there is nothing after death would be at a funeral.
Oh, boy. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's just why. I mean, this would be on the same level as the most obnoxious fundamentalist, which is why I called some of these atheists Westboro atheists. They're just making an intolerable spectacle and nuisance of themselves and bringing their own cause into terrible discredit. Aren't you done with witnessing and making an obnoxious pest of yourself? Wasn't that one of the reasons to get out of fundamentalism, and now you're doing the same thing? You got to get out of this cultic mindset, or why do you even bother? You haven't really changed.
Do you think that it's possible, though, that see, I've always thought that when a person comes out of a fundamentalist religion, they had for at least a period of their life a fairly thick armor of faith. Mm-hmm. And when they finally give up that faith, they have to replace it with an equally thick armor of something else, whether it's rationalism or skepticism or just militant atheism. So it's kind of like they have to balance what they lost with something equal in what they get out of what they've switched to.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. The pendulum is not going to settle down in the middle at the first time. And you're right, you have a need, there's a vacuum, and the temptation is to fill it. Yeah, I have a lot of understanding and sympathy for that, for people in that position, but I would hope they'd eventually look forward to settling down in the middle and not being possessed by the issues anymore, because it's the same issues. It's like, I like to say, two teams in a stadium. Sometimes people will switch teams but stay in the same game when really they ought to just leave the stadium for their own good.
Yeah, find a new game.
Yeah. There are things where I think you do have to keep an eye open and fight on certain issues, like trying to get creationism taught in public school, for instance. But that's pretty manageable. Not all fundamentalists do that, and when they do, you can fight it on a local level, and it's been done pretty successfully. If you think about the militant Islamist radicals, apologetics and counter-apologetics means nothing there. You're dealing with insane savages, and you have to take much sterner measures, and that's just not the case with any kind of with any other religion that I know of.
Yeah. For the way I tackle the issue of going overboard, I guess, with the aggression is again with. Kind of going back to skepticism and your own biases, like why you're doing things. So when I was a fundamentalist evangelical and I would go after people, I had a part of me that truly believed everything. But there was always that one part that knew it didn't really make sense. So one of the reasons for going to convert other people is to hear yourself say it and to hear the feedback of anyone you convert.
That's right.
You're kind of using them as kind of a fill-in for your own doubts.
If you can convince them you're right, then you must be right.
Exactly, yeah.
And even if you don't, even though they say, get out of here, you nut, well, you've been persecuted for Christ, so you're living out the New Testament pattern, so you can't really lose either way.
But there's a mirror with any, like you say, it's not just religion. Ideology is the word I use. And so somebody who's an atheist, their facts might be correct, but if they are, like you say, militant and going after people, no matter what the time, no matter what the place, and they don't care about the person in front of them, they're so aggressive, then I've tried to explain this. It's kind of the same thing. You are using that person as a doubt of your own insecurities, and by attacking them, you're kind of using them as a substitute. You should have more confidence in your own principles and what you've come to understand. Then I think that automatically starts subsiding some of the aggression.
Yeah, that's very wise. I agree.
I look at religious faith almost like a if I'm using the term correctly, like a non-Newtonian fluid. You know, no, it's true though. Like if you go aggressively at it, you're just going to hit a solid wall. But if you reach in slowly and try and just be subtle and gentle with it, you will get a lot further. For the listeners that will eventually hear this, hopefully they know what a non-Newtonian fluid is. I'm sure many of them will, but for me, just to be honest, even me at this age, I'm a little bit more aggressive than Corey was initially, and just recently I was sitting at I've gone back to school, I'm back in college, and the discussion came up about atheism being a religion, and I'll admit, I was not on my game that day. I was so taken aback by being in a school and hearing that I just took the nuh-uh approach, and it wasn't my shining moment. But what do you think is the best tool that skeptics or atheists can use to avoid dogmatism?
Well, I think the best approach is to just indicate to people, well, you may think what you wish, but let me just explain how I came to find the approach you're now taking and that I used to wanting. I loved this belief and wanted to defend it, but I'm afraid I was unable to do it. This is why. I mean, you may think nothing of this. It may not bother you at all, but let me account for the approach I now take. There, if you're not saying, look, I'm going to beat you, let me show why you are wrong, you're not challenging them, and they're not going to get defensive. If they're listening to you and you're saying, yeah, I wished I could believe that, but I just couldn't carry it through, that's going to make them think in a way that a direct challenge would not. And I know it sounds like I'm saying, well, this is a sneaky way to get them to abandon their faith, but no, I want to take that consistently. I don't care if they abandon it or not. But if, again, I need to account for where I have wound up, I'm happy to do it and let them do with it as they will. At least I'm not going to slap them in the face and get in a fight, which is not going to leave them open.
True enough. One of the other factors that I think plays into why there are so many, or there's a perception of being so many aggressive non-believers, atheists, skeptics, is demographically and geographically we are separated. It's only with the advent and the use of the internet that a large collection of us can really come together, but individually in our towns and counties and provinces or states, there doesn't tend to be a great number of us. So I wonder, because we tend to be surrounded by the opposition more so in our certain localities, that creates this need to be aggressively defensive of our positions.
That's right. That's the classic defensiveness of sectarians. When even if you just like splitting off from a major denomination and starting some new, more pure version of it as you view it, now you don't fit in with a larger group anymore, and so there's more pressure on you. It's like you're in a submarine underwater. The water pressure is much greater than if you were obviously on let's say the external pressure is much greater than if you were up in the open air. So you got to really brace those walls, and zeal is the way to do that, and engagement with the hostile forces without. But that again is basically social psychology, and it is natural. It's part of human nature. But as you wisely said, you do have to look back. You have to look in the mirror and say, well, why am I so militant or whatever? Am I being insecure? And what do I do about that?
Well, I would think there would be a certain level of natural insecurity, especially in the early portion of falling out of belief, especially if you're surrounded by family or your community that is still religious and trying to get you back on the bandwagon, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite helpful to try to be able to counterbalance that pressure. That's no cheat. I mean, that's just to keep your head clear. You need to do that.
So, my question to you then would be: do you think that the use of the internet is a key component that will eventually soften hardline atheism, or do you think it is a vehicle to make it more rigid?
I don't know. I couldn't say, but the fact that people like Josh McDowell and others are saying, boy, the internet is really hurting us. People are getting an unfiltered earful and even seeking out more of all this skeptical atheist so-and-so. That may be emboldening people on our side to say, okay, we got them on the run now. And I wouldn't condemn that. I don't think it's somehow immoral for them to go after theism. I guess I'm just thinking, look at the possible ironies of this. In terms of the effect on others. Are you just making atheism loathsome in their eyes, like by this billboard, "Who needs Jesus at Christmas"? Who's going to be prompted to consider atheism from that? It's just a slap in the face. And and you have to wonder, but what the heck? It's ultimately not doing anybody any harm to have the gauntlet cast down. It might turn off some people. So I don't want to sound like too condemnatory of militant atheism. I just think it may be counterproductive. So I don't know which way it's going to go with the internet, but it might just add fuel to the fire. And what the heck? I don't think that'd be a bad thing.
Right.
Several months ago, I was making videos before I started the podcast, and then I realized how much more work they were. But one of the ones that I did was a quick response to an atheist that I actually really enjoy. He goes by the name Mr. Deity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
and he made one that was meant to be humorous but really toxic about making it very clear that he was calling on atheist skeptics to say religious skeptics are not real skeptics. It was very clear that that was the premise of the video. And it was just aggressive and toxic enough that I made a response. I went through and I just stopped the video or put up in words what fallacy he was using at every given point. Yeah, and a lot of people got upset with me for it, including my local skeptics group that didn't understand why I was being so upset about it. And I was trying to bring across the difference that I don't think there's anything productive in the video. He's not telling any atheists anything they don't already think, if they think it. All he's going to do is seek to separate people who still have a theistic view on on certain issues, but are skeptical on some issues that they are willing to discuss. And so I felt like, what's the point if these people are willing to come in and talk about the vaccinations and communicate that to their community, along with a whole host of other things like getting secular values into the government? Why would we want to force these people out if they're not willing to give up their God? It just seems, like you say, unproductive.
Yeah. It is like an enticing irony to say, doesn't to believers in religion who are skeptical of other things, doesn't it occur to you that you might be more consistent to shine the light on these convictions too? But I have to think that it would be better just to have a friendly discussion sometime in a skeptics group and just to exchange opinions. If somebody can say, well, here's why I think that this is above reproach, but not this, or I think there really is reason to believe this, but not that. Okay, I mean, if just raising the issue is probably enough. But as you say, putting it that way is saying, look, get out of here. It reminds me of when my mother-in-law was a real radically conservative Episcopalian, and all the stuff about gay ordination, and she was just always on fire about that, and she would follow these ultra-conservative Episcopalian websites, and the vituperation, the vitriol in these things. Basically, they were saying, well, you liberals and you gays in the church, why don't you just get out of here and go to hell where you belong? I thought, somebody's, in the words of one of my favorite theologians, they've made a wrong point in Albuquerque. If you've come to this point, something is drastically wrong. Why just tell people to go to hell? I mean, is their presence that intolerable? I think you're right. There's just I haven't heard what Mr. Deity said on it, but I mean, the impression you got, I think also it's just needless antagonism.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people realize just how many religious people are out there when you need their cooperation on so many issues. There is it's very, on a functional level, it's just really self-defeating. Like, you can't just eliminate them and then do everything you want. Your numbers shrink so drastically. But there are people out there who are atheists now who do go around, as some people told me, they do go around and say, well, the reason I gave up my faith is because someone attacked me with vitriol, and that shocked me out of it. It forced me to reconsider it. But I tried telling them that is the exception, not the rule. Because usually when you attack someone, they recede deeper into what they know. They go back into their community or they go back into their beliefs. That's my experience. I did not challenge my beliefs because someone attacked me. I challenged them because someone piqued my curiosity, and unbeknownst to our religious leaders, they had taught me that I should always seek the truth. And I mistakenly thought that God and the truth were the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with these people, apologists, God has become the moral equivalent of truth. To borrow something, I think, from William James, that some moral endeavor could be the moral equivalent of war. So onward Christian soldiers and that kind of thing. Well, for apologists, the Christianity is the moral equivalent of truth, but that means it isn't necessarily the truth. You're just putting that halo around it, and so the truth becomes less important than defending the party line.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
I'm not sure how long we have you today. Well, I have you. I want to ask if you have any advice for anyone who basically has very little knowledge of the Bible, either they grew up like I did and they have kind of been told what the Bible means, but they don't really understand it, or even people who don't have a really religious background, what would be a good overall strategy for these people to start their walk towards having a critical understanding of what this book is, or these books are?
Almost any study Bible with the introductions to Old and New Testaments and then the individual books would be a good place to start. Like with the new RSV, Revised Standard Version, I don't really like that translation, and I think that often the commentary is a little too conservative, but that wouldn't really matter. It's an initiation into critical approaches to the Bible. Who wrote what? When was it written? Is it consistent? And so forth. That wouldn't be a bad idea. That at least shows that it's not just a magic book all on the same level and dropped out of heaven by God. And any books on Old or New Testament introduction, I would hope people would read more than one, because there are many different views on that. But that might not be a bad idea. It's just that if you get, like, let's say the Ryrie Study Bible done by Charles Ryrie at Dallas Seminary, you're just going to get more fundamentalism. And I think that masks the real issues about the historical background of the Bible. It's still all theology. So, boy.
Is it a big question?
Yeah, you wouldn't think it would be. There are some books that, if they weren't a bit out of date, I'd like to recommend, like Edgar J. Goodspeed's How Came the Bible. That goes over the historical background of the whole canon formation, as well as the different types of literature and all that, but it's kind of outdated. He was writing decades ago, but that sort of a book is handy. I'm just not as familiar with modern ones that say that, but books that are called something like Intro to New Testament or Intro to the Bible or something probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Strangely enough, that is a toughie. I like to be self-serving and suggest people take a look at my pre-Nicene New Testament, or the new smaller version of it that's about to come out, the Human Bible New Testament, which has my translation of the 27 books plus introductory essays about all of them. But there again, I'm taking a really far out radical view that most people would think certifiably insane. So I don't know if people should start with that or not.
On that note, obviously the one that's most contentious of issues, it always comes back to whether Jesus was a historical person. It's the argument these days doesn't even seem to be most debated whether he was God. It's whether he was a historical person. And if I understand correctly, your view is not he was not a historical person. Your view is there is a lack of evidence demonstrating he was a historical person. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the burden of proof lies on the one who would say that this seemingly mythical character was not merely mythical, and I have not yet seen that burden borne to my satisfaction. So I tend to think it's more likely there was no historical Jesus, but I try to nuance it that way. It's not a dogma or even a belief with me. It's just the hypothesis I find most likely. So we don't know that there was no Jesus or anything like that. And there are other plausible hypotheses, like the Jesus the Zealot approach, that he was some kind of freedom fighter or subversive against Rome. Yeah. There have been very good cases made for that. In fact, I think if there was a historical Jesus, that would be he. But I have problems with that and still think the evidence is really non-existent. But, maybe I'll change my mind. It would only take somebody discovering an old papyrus letter where someone happened to mention hearing Jesus speak or something. That's probably all it would take, but we don't have even that. And so I tend to think, well, you gotta show me, but so far it hasn't been done, I think.
Dr. Bob Price is a Bible scholar that I previously interviewed about the historical Jesus. Today we're going to talk about his latest book, The Case Against, The Case for Christ.
I decided, I don't know how wide a distribution I can get for a book, but I at least ought to make some attempt to correct the massive disinformation contained in this thing, and that's what really moved me to do it. It's just a deposit of smug apologetics masquerading as historical study. And what gets my goat about this is, not just in this book, but whenever they do it, is not that they're trying to propagate the Christian faith. I'm a student of comparative religion. I appreciate and love all the religions. I don't hate any of them. It'd be an unscholarly, unhumanist thing to do. But I do get my back up when people are misrepresenting the facts and about their own religion or others. And I feel like, well, in that case, I ought to enter the ring, and so I did.
Well, the first couple chapters in The Case for Christ, Lee Strobel's book, defend the Gospels as generally reliable portraits of the historical Jesus. What do you think of that claim?
It's completely circular, and it's completely deductive.
A blessing from the Lord. God be praised.
Yeah, probably. I'm assuming part of the difficulty is that each sort of reign of theology within what would become the Christian church had a habit of destroying the stuff before them that they didn't felt conformed. So we don't have any of the original texts, possibly for that reason, right?
That's right. We know, for instance, of an Acts of Pilate that made Jesus look bad, and it was suppressed. We don't know what it said. There are no quotes from it. It could have been authentic. It could have been, as most assumed, just anti-Christian propaganda. But once Christians were in power, that was that. And various other Gospels and so on were destroyed. But I'm thinking like how occasionally they'll find just a bunch of old papyrus letters in Egypt somewhere, as they've done before, and just letters home from traveling businessmen and so on, who will mention this or that. If you just had a kind of non-axe grinding attestation that somebody had seen the famous Jesus of Nazareth or something, and it didn't appear to be some cooked up hoax thing, I would have to say, yeah, all right. Or like that James ossuary thing that turned out to be a fraud. Yeah. Even if it had been authentically ancient, it was too ambiguous, but that's the kind of thing I mean. It's conceivable you could find some early document that established Jesus as a historical figure. That'd be fine with me, but so far, no evidence is no evidence.
With Paul, what is the difference in our understanding of Paul as opposed to Jesus as a historical person? Like, is there more data to support what we know about him, or pretty much the same?
I think it's nearly the same, because I am convinced by the Dutch radical critics, so-called, Van Manen, Lohman, and various others, Bruno Bauer, that the Pauline epistles are not written by the same person. They're written from different viewpoints. They're patchwork quilts that have conflicting opposite views, one page after another. They've been heavily interpolated, and there's no way of telling if a historical Paul started this tradition. Like, for instance, with Peter, there's 2 letters attributed to him in the New Testament, a couple of more outside the New Testament, and various apocalypses and gospels of Peter and so on that no real critic thinks are genuine. And it shouldn't be surprising if Paul was enough of a big name for whatever reason to have generated a similar amount of stuff that didn't go back to him. And I think the evidence of the letters makes it somewhat unlikely that they do go back to a single person. There are mentions of Simon Magus in Josephus in connection with some of the people that Paul meets in the book of Acts. And there are discussions of Simon Magus and Irenaeus and others that sound a lot like Paul. So I tend to go along with Hermann Dettering, who argues that the historical Paul was Simon Magus, and that Paul is more of a title. And it has different significance depending on what language you look at and so on. And that the Pauline epistles began to be written by Marcion, who would have written most of Galatians and possibly an earlier version of Ephesians, and that other Marcionites and Gnostics and eventually Catholics were adding to these documents. So in a sense, there's a basis for Paul, but it would be kind of like people that ask, was there a real King Arthur? Well, there may have been some British chieftain in the 6th century whose adventures gave rise to this, but we don't really know. Or was there a real Merlin? Well, there was some Welsh poet named Myrddin. He could have become Merlin. Does that mean there really was a Merlin the magician, or are we just talking about an antecedent to one? And so in the same way, was there really an Apostle Paul, or is this possibly a largely fictional character, though glancingly based on real historical figures? And like when you look at the book of Acts, the stories of Paul's conversion and his preaching seem to be heavily based on Second Maccabees and the Bacchae of Euripides. It seems to be all literary in origin, not historical. So I really think we're stuck with almost blanket agnosticism about all these characters.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned Marcion, and that's something that I've looked a little bit into. Now, wasn't he actually forcibly removed from the Orthodox Church? And then basically, it was almost his writings that kind of prompted the writing of the Gospels themselves, or like the Council of Nicaea that followed. That's how I seem to have recalled it. I'm a couple of years away from when I last read up on him.
Well, Marcion would have been a couple of centuries before Nicaea, and Christian doctrine was sufficiently in flux that, for instance, in the late 1st, early 2nd century, you have the Shepherd of Hermas, an apocalypse written by a church elder in Rome that has views that would shortly be considered heretical, a kind of an adoptionist Christology and so forth. Or Valentinus was known in Rome, and some liked his Gnostic views. Marcion went to Rome to offer himself as a candidate for Bishop of Rome, and he set forth his views, and they decided, plus he brought a big monetary contribution, they heard him out and couldn't buy what he said, the rejection of the Old Testament and all that, and then gave him the donation back to keep things straight, and he started his own church. So yeah, they considered him a heretic, but it was it's not like a Jehovah's Witness throwing his hat in the ring to become the next pope. There was still a lot of diversity there. It was thinkable that he could become the Bishop of Rome, though it didn't work out. And once he started his church, it grew like wildfire all over the empire, and Marcionites, if not Marcion himself, it's a little hard to tell, came up with the first New Testament, because Marcion said that the Old Testament was the revelation of the Creator God, not the Father of Jesus Christ, who were different deities. And so he said the Old Testament, there's nothing all that wrong with it, but it really isn't a Christian book. Let's leave it to Jews. And so Marcionites, or Marcion, decided we do need a scripture, though. What say we use the gospel of the Lord, which looks like an earlier, shorter version of our Luke, and the 10 epistles of Paul, and that minus the pastorals, which hadn't been written yet. They were written as a counterblast to Marcion. And once this book called the Evangelion and the Apostolicon, the book of the gospel, the book of the apostle, once this became very popular, the Catholics thought it was like Sputnik being launched. They said, hey, this isn't bad. We got to have our own version of this. And so they seem to have decided to pad out the Marcionite scripture and to bring in 3 other gospels to add to his gospel, to make it Luke's gospel, to write the book of Acts, to honor the other apostles, because Marcion had repudiated all of them. Paul was the only one that understood Jesus, he thought, and then various other works in there. And this became the 27-book New Testament, I think, already in the middle of the 2nd century, though it was another 2 centuries before it became official. But that edition was out there circulating, and finally St. Athanasius, who was one of the biggies at the Council of Nicaea, declared that, okay, this is it. No more Gospels and stuff. You ought to burn those, which is why we have the Nag Hammadi Gnostic texts. They got a copy of that encyclical and said, well, let's bury them. At least somebody may one day be able to read them. These guys were Christian monks who were reading all this Gnostic stuff. It shows how mixed and syncretistic it was. But yeah, Marcion, or at least his followers, were the first ones to come up with a New Testament instead of an Old. And then Catholics decided, well, let's keep the Old Testament, add to their scripture, and make it into a New Testament. So he was enormously influential in the evolution of even mainstream Christianity.
Yeah. Well, that's, and I'm sorry for my not remembering it completely. Like I said, it's been a number of years, but I do recall that Marcion was almost a catalyst for them coming together and trying to create their own complete book, or their own complete collection of the Christian stories. And what I find...
Oh, yeah, you're totally right. Not even almost. I mean, it's very clear he was the catalyst, yeah.
But what I find interesting about that is that one of the main arguments that even I've used is against believers is, look how horrible a deity the Old Testament God is, and then all of a sudden he goes through this personality shift where he becomes this all-loving, benevolent deity later on. And Marcion, it almost seems like he wanted to divorce the 2 gods from one another and make them distinct deities. Am I correct in that?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And the Gospels do have hellfire, which never appears in the Old Testament, but it's interesting that the epistles do not even the pastoral epistles. No matter who wrote them, there's never any mention of anybody going to hell. In the Pauline material, so-called, it just speaks of the righteous rising from the dead and the wicked not. There's nothing about him checking into the inferno or something, and so that kind of fits the Marcionite approach to God, a more benevolent God.
Now, I'm not entirely certain if this is correct, but I seem to recall from what I know of Marcion that he declared or believed that Jesus was almost like a God of forgiveness or justice, whereas the Old Testament God was like a Jewish war god or something more akin to wrath.
That's right. He viewed Jehovah as a kind of Oriental despot who dispensed rough justice. It's not like he viewed him as a villain exactly, but the kind of just like I admire Napoleon. A whole lot of people died because of him, but it wasn't like he was a serial killer. It's a different sort of a category, and he viewed the Old Testament God that way. He gave the laws and all of that, and was not very forgiving. And that's why the hitherto unknown father of Jesus, and keep in mind in Luke and Matthew, he says, Heavenly Father, Lord of heaven and earth, you've hidden the truth from the wise and sophisticated and revealed it to the infants. No one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son decides to reveal him. What? Nobody knows the Father? I mean, that sounds more Marcionite than anything else. Jesus is revealing a different God. And according to Marcion, what he did was to say he made a deal with Jehovah Jesus' death was a ransom, buying, like manumitting slaves, buying the freedom of the creatures of Jehovah, so that they could be adopted as the children of the Father of Jesus. Now, that makes a lot of sense of the New Testament or the Pauline references to being adopted, adoption as sons and all of that. Well, in other words, you were somebody else's child, but now Jesus' Father is adopting you. It also is the only sensible understanding I know of the idea that Jesus' death was somehow redemptive. Well, what does redeeming mean? Well, to buy back the freedom of someone. And otherwise, you get into all these ridiculous things from the Middle Ages that Jesus' death was somehow a ransom because Satan had kidnapped the human race, or God was paying a debt to himself, or whatever.
Oh, that's where it gets ridiculous.
Or why is it that the Pauline epistles always say, to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ? It seems to me, it sounds like he's differentiating it from a different God, and I think he is. Who is the God of this world mentioned in 2 Corinthians, if not a different God from the Father of Jesus Christ? So there's a lot of Marcionite stuff in there, and he did believe in two gods. And Jesus was the son of the hitherto unknown God.
It almost makes you wonder if Marcion's views had been taken more to heart earlier on, if any of these discussions would be happening now. Because one of the biggest problems that I always seem to view personally faces theists in the current day and age is this inconsistency between the Old and New Testament. They just don't fit together. It's almost like they've got these two heavy lead anvils mashed together with plasticine. It just doesn't work. But Marcion's views, they may have actually worked and been slightly more convincing at a casual glance anyway.
Yeah, I think that really comes to a head in the stuff in Romans and Galatians and Colossians about how the law has been superseded, even though in Romans, not that it was bad, don't want to give you that idea, but nonetheless it was the way in which sin entered my awareness, but that doesn't make it sinful, etc. This seems to me to be a Catholicizing attempt to paper over the more radical Gnostic Marcionite view that still peeks out in the New Testament, that, as in Galatians is plainly stated, God did not give the law to Moses. If it was one guy, he wouldn't have needed a mediator. He'd have just gone to him directly. No, it was the principalities and powers, the elemental spirits, the angels who gave the law. And so once you get out from under their heel, the law simply no longer applies. I think that was the original approach, and trying to paste the two together, like you say, it just does not work. Like Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, it's impossible to ride two different horses at the same time.
It's like trying to paste the video from Brokeback Mountain to the audio for Star Wars, as far as I'm concerned.
And even, well, with the New Testament as people get it now, I'm not sure how long it's been this way, but it's even presented in its order as a narrative itself. It's not chronological. It's designed to give you the story in the sequence they want you to read it.
Yeah, because they somebody's noticed that in Paul there is no narrative of an earthly Jesus. But if you read the Gospels first, you'll assume Paul is referring to all that stuff when it's not clear that he is. On the traditional reading, the Pauline epistles are earlier than the Gospels. That's no longer clear to me. They may be, because all this stuff may have been written in the late first, early second century. There's clues to that, but at least it seems to represent different types of Christianity, one with an earthly Jesus, one perhaps without one. So you're right, there's huge differences there, even in the New Testament canon.
We were talking about Bart Ehrman. To give him credit, he was one of the people whose work helped me to really understand elements of how historians will eliminate certain things or put evidence on the side of it being by a certain author that fall into anything, including the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I found his stuff marvelous, and I was surprised when he came out with his book, saying Jesus was a historical person. But I had a small exchange with him, totally unexpectedly on Facebook. I don't know. I don't remember signing up to be on his fan page, or I guess his discussion page it would be. And all of a sudden, I got on my Facebook news feed. I got a thing that he posted, and it was him talking about one of his readers who, sent in this post, saying that I think it was the book of Galatians. I can't remember for sure. I think he was saying in the book of Galatians that Paul talks about going to see James, the brother of Jesus, and this is absolute proof that destroys the myth theory. That Jesus, why would Paul say he was meeting the brother of Jesus unless, this guy was really his brother? And I was just going to say, I think that some of your colorful illustrations have rubbed off on me because I got a lot of approval from my reply. My reply was, I said, to my understanding, we haven't demonstrated that we really knew who this Paul fellow was, as he's discussed as a historical figure either. So don't we need to first establish how we know he is a solid historical figure before we use him to establish James, the brother of Jesus, and then Jesus himself through him? I said, don't you think this is kind of like saying we know that Rocky was an actual squirrel because Bullwinkle knew him?
Yep.
And we can also say that since he referred to it, therefore we can extrapolate that he was also a flying squirrel.
Yeah, right. Bravo.
And Mr. Ehrman replied back simply that Rocky did not have letters he left behind.
That's just begging the whole question.
Yeah, and that's actually exactly what I said. And I got twice as many likes from his own followers.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I think that there's a shift that's going on. And, I was, in my further answers, I was very clear. I was very respectful to him. I didn't want him to think it was a personal attack or I thought little of him. But like I say, I think that more and more people are feeling less obligation to uphold that traditional view. And they want to really know, like, if I'm going to look into this, how do we know that all of this stuff is established outside of the tradition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these questions were raised in the 19th century, but never adequately addressed. The closest anybody came was Albert Schweitzer in his book Paul and His Interpreters, and even there, it's not. It's a good attempt, not just laughing them off like most people do, but even there was, I think, not a cogent reply, and all of this stuff about Pauline authorship or the existence of Jesus was just given the cold shoulder. Nobody wanted to believe it, so there was no protest against shuttering this stuff. And now that because of the internet, it's gained a circulation. It's very much like Josh McDowell recently said that there's so much of this atheism and skepticism available. You got to drill the faith into the kids or you're going to lose them by age 12. Well, in the same way, in the blurb for Maurice Casey's anti-mythicist book that's about to appear, he said that, this had been settled long ago, but due to the internet, more and more people are bringing up this crazy theory about no historical Jesus. He sounds a lot like McDowell, and there's this worry that the dam is breaking, and that this is the professional guild trying to maintain their authoritative, like you say, hegemony on these questions. Oh, we're to be listened to, not those people. This mob that knoweth not the law is accursed. It's ironic. Of course, ultimately, that doesn't make anybody right or wrong, but it's a pretty interesting phenomenon.
Yeah. And like you say, it's very interesting to watch how they're responding. I once wrote into you. You answered a question of mine on your show. This is quite some time ago. It was a question that my brother and I, he's a minister, and he went to a Bible school here in Ontario, and it was a question about, I guess I had been taken by surprise. He did not realize that the Gospels were not by the people whose names are now attributed to them, that they were written anonymously, like they had no name attached.
Mm-hmm.
I told him that, and he told me I was wrong, and this discussion broke out. And I came to realize later I was upset with his school, that they would not have at least told him about that this was a discussion piece rather than filling him with the counter argument and not telling him, not giving him an objective view on it. So the question I had asked you was about that, and you answered it. But I guess, in a more general sense, I don't think most of us understand what kind of an environment there is academically where it comes to biblical history, biblical text. Is there still, I know there's this traditional view that tends to permeate a lot. Is there some kind of pressure, some kind of maybe financial or just, like I say, traditional pressure to conform for the reputation of the institute or for the field?
Well, I think there is sincerity in a sense that the teachers and the sponsors of the school find themselves in a box defined by their religious tradition, and so that they want to hold to the party line. It's become institutional policy, and they're simply not able to entertain the notion that maybe this stuff is wrong and needs to be reexamined. Just like if you're in a Presbyterian seminary, they're not going to have classes reopening the question of infant baptism, or maybe predestination is a mistake. No, that's they figure that's been settled long ago. And so if somebody does want to reopen these questions, they'd rather you find someplace else to do it, because their institution is really a kind of vocational institution. It's like a medical school for souls. Okay, we've got these techniques, we've got these beliefs about the etiology of diseases. If you want to pursue alternative medicine, go someplace else. We're using proven techniques and teaching people to use them. Well, in this case, we want people to be pastors of our congregations and teachers of seminarians coming up as they are now. And so the issue of truth is taken for granted. They're just not really interested in that because they think they've got it. And so that is a great way of killing any kind of inquiry, but it's the practical knowledge of a vocational institution, and they're just not interested in the theoretical quest for the truth. No, we've already got it. It's a question of how to apply it. Well, that's just not the place to go if you want to learn about the open-ended questions. And if you try to do it there, you're not going to get anywhere.
So seminaries then are more like places that reinforce your current norms instead of allowing you a broader view.
Yeah, and the ones that have not taken that approach, like Harvard Divinity School, for instance, they have, I think, maybe something like less than 50% of their graduates even go into parish ministry, because sure enough, there is a broad spectrum of perspectives and pursuits there. And the people that go there for that, they're not interested in serving communion and preaching sermons. That's just not their thing.
Our parents, they want the best of stuff for us. But right now, they gotta do what's right for them. Because it's their time. Their time. Up there. Down here, it's our time. It's our time down here. That's all over the second we ride up Troy's bucket.
Yeah. I've also, in particular with people like my mother, like most of my family is still conservative and devout. I've tried to explain that there's kind of this idea that if people go to university or college, that they lose their religion. And it's actually, I think, people on the left and the right end of the political spectrum both seem to think this at large. But I've tried to explain that that's not what the statistics bear out. And I said specifically, what a lot of Christians worry about is when their children go and they start learning about biblical history and the text, where it comes from, what we know about it, how it's used. I said a lot of them It challenges their faith, specifically that the book is perfect. I think, as I've heard, a lot of them still have a belief in some type of God, or they still, go and participate in the religion, but not all of them become automatic atheists. That's what I've tried to assuage your fears. No, they don't automatically, because my brother studied it. So I guess it depends on the perspective you decide to take while you're doing it.
That's true, but often people will become more nuanced and unable to be the black and white dogmatists from the pulpit or whatever, and they can see that happening. Oh, what do you learn in theological seminary this semester? And you begin to realize if you say the wrong thing, people are going to be suspicious. So there is something like that. They don't want you losing your grip on the tradition that they sent you there to learn and preserve. And sure enough, some of these people do eventually start losing it, like the case of poor Mike Licona, a big-time apologist, a disciple of Gary Habermas. He uses the same old, I think, bogus arguments for the resurrection. But having met Mike, it's clear to me he is somebody that wants to know the truth, but he's so ensconced in this apologetic paradigm, he doesn't see certain options as remotely plausible. And yet, in this massive book on the resurrection, he dealt with the night of the living dead passage in Matthew 27, where the many of the saints came alive during the crucifixion and hung around playing poker until his resurrection, and then they showed themselves in Jerusalem. I mean, and then they drop it. What happened? This has always been an embarrassment to apologists. And Mike said, well, I'm beginning to think this may be just narrative theology. It didn't exactly happen. Oh boy, did he catch hell for that. And had to go back with his tail between his legs and say, oh, okay, I admit I was wrong. And in the next edition of the book, I'll cut that. Well, that's what you're concerned with, that he doesn't believe in the zombie passage, which is not only useless, but embarrassing to orthodoxy. You can't even compromise on that. That's what happens with a lot of people. Or Peter Enns, who wrote this book, The Evolution of Adam or something. He's an evangelical who's teaching at Westminster Seminary, and in this book he says, there was never any Adam and Eve, but there was a Jesus now, and so forth. He got kicked out, and when these people learn too much, they try to stay in, but people can tell, nah, I'm sorry, you've been infected, you're out of here.
It almost sounds like the study of a more broad scope of the specific theology, Christianity, is more likely to become the death of your particular denominational view than it is the faith itself.
Yeah, I've heard from people that they still have, like Einstein meant when he talked about God. This, in my opinion, it's so abstract that it doesn't really mean anything anyways. But just kind of like there's an order to the universe, or there's a beauty to the universe, something to that effect. I've tried to tell them it doesn't mean that there's not going to be changes, but the most specific are going to be about the Bible itself. Like I've noticed a number of people saying, let me put it this way. The church that I came from, it still has a minister, and our old minister is now an assistant minister. Neither of them, I think my assistant minister has 1 year at Bible school, and that's it between the two of them. And they have a couple other people that preach. Neither of them have any Bible school. And I think that is because they really like their beliefs.
Yeah, Why muddy the water, they figure.
Yeah.
If you go into it in depth, you're just digging your own grave.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't mean that they'd lose all of their beliefs, but like you say, some things are going to change. Those are specific to when someone goes, well, the God told us in the Word of God, and it's perfect, and so we know it's true. Then they would go, okay, well, which part of the Bible? Because there's this other part over here, and they seem to contradict each other. And as soon as you say something like that, everyone's alarms go off at the local church.
Yeah, because the Bible has become unusable in the only sense they ever wanted to use it, namely as an infallible answer book. And when you say, well, I still believe it's inspired in some kind of sense, but it isn't that sort of a book, sorry, that's what we wanted it for. We don't care if you think it's inspired in some sense. But if you say that you can't just believe what it says, then the whole thing's shot to hell. It's an epistemological watershed there. We only believe what we do because, as if this were a foundation or a reason, the Bible, which is infallible, says so. Well, how come you believe the Bible's infallible? Well, because it says so. And it's totally circular. But even if you say, well, I still believe the Bible, not the way we need you to. It might be what you say, but really it's unusable to us in that case. If it has contradictions and differing opinions among the writer, it might as well be written by Satan in that case. We just can't deal with that kind of a Bible.
This is kind of the purpose of the show, is the larger sense of, it's called Apostasy now. But the apostasy part, I'm trying to extend the meaning to challenging all of your assumptions and all the things that we feel ourselves pressured to conform to, kind of encouraging it. And hopefully, eventually when my life's a little more controlled, we'll get into maybe talking to some people who actually work around the world and people who really suffer for not conforming. I would like to do that eventually. But in the sense, the larger sense, I've tried having this discussion with a number of people that to me, though religion is definitely the most profound and the most widespread, I guess, potentially does the most harm in certain ways, ideology is really what it is. It's a form of ideology with deep roots and more specific functions. What you just said about circular reasoning, that can happen with any ideological mindset a person gets into, where you say, well, the past had this horrible thing done, the present has this one solution, and the future will be glorious.
Yeah.
How do you know it? Well, I know because the past had this terrible thing done.
Yeah. How do you know? I mean, you ultimately, Tillich said that this was the real existential risk of faith, that you shouldn't say, okay, I believe so and so, even when there is sufficient reason to doubt it. That's just intellectual suicide. But in terms of committing yourself to something in the world, what your life is going to be about and the meaning of it, well, you can never be absolutely sure about that, but you have to make a decision and a stand. You could be wrong, but it'd be better to do that than to just stay on the fence and be nothing your whole life.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to let you go. We've had you for an hour and a half. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you very much for your time coming on the show and talking with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for clearing up some of the questions I had.
Well, it was great to meet you guys.
Great to meet you too. Hopefully we'll get you back.
And definitely, when you get a chance, just email me a list of any links that you want. I would like to direct people to your activities and your work.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Terrific.
First, you gotta do the truffle shuffle.
And there you have it. Another episode in the can, on its way to you. Apostasy Now. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Robert M. Price. I want to thank Smashlock for showing up again. Like I say, it's always fun with him. He's got good questions. And I want to thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, if you want to give any feedback, we've got spots on our website. You can do that. And I'm always glad that people tune in. Let your friends know. And I'm going to put the links in the show notes. But if you'd like to know what his address is, you can put in a Google search, Robert M. Price, or you can go to Robert M. Price, all one word, .mindvendor, all one word, .com. You can find all the links there, including for his regular podcast, The Bible Geek, which is a phenomenal fountain of knowledge, which I highly recommend. Until next time, just a little thought I thought I would throw in. It's an interesting thought about how we as atheists or skeptics, or just as human beings, commit money when we donate money to a cause. I've been following a number of them. On the show, you've heard me talk about my friend Adam Lolliker trying to raise money for a short film so that he can raise awareness
about what soldiers go through with post-traumatic stress disorder, especially the ones that have it really badly and end up homeless. He managed to get some thousands of dollars together. I would have liked to see more, and really I think he deserved, and projects like that deserve more. It's not to guilt trip you, but just a thought. There was a very popular atheist site, and I'm going to go on a limb and name it, thegoodatheist.net, who decided, without any biblical, historical knowledge, without going to school for any of this, decided it'd be funny to write a book making fun of the Old Testament, which is good. And he decided to have a campaign on Kickstarter, and then he switched it over to Indiegogo to raise money. He asked for $10,000. His fans that summer gave him $18,000+ for a funny little book. Adam was not able to raise that much money. A number of projects I've seen have not been able to raise that much money. And when you look at the results, the would-be author and host of The Good Atheist, Jacob Fortan, horribly disappointed his fans by not finishing the book. As of coming up to Christmas, I think he's still not done writing it. He spent all the money and wanted more money from his listeners in order to finish the book he had already collected money for. I recommend people, first of all, think about the priorities. It says a lot about who you are and who we are collectively. And second, it makes a difference to the lives of the people around you. And third, places like Indiegogo, they don't have to give you the money back. And so you better think twice about who it is you're giving that money to and what kind of a project. And on that note, I also highly recommend, if you enjoy Robert M. Price's knowledge and what he gives, that you consider going there, buying some of his books. They're excellent reads. And also he has a donation because he spends virtually all of his time now trying to help educate the public. So I highly recommend that. Tune in next time. We'll have another good guest. And have a good holiday.
You're gonna live with me now. Huh? Yeah, I'm gonna take care of you. Because I love you.
I love you, John.